Hi everyone, welcome to another video. Want to have a chat today about the early stages when you quit gambling, and how the likelihood is that when you first start quitting gambling, that things are going to feel like they get an awful lot worse before they even begin to get better. Now, the common consensus is that when you quit gambling, your life changes in so many ways for the better, and this is absolutely true. In the long term, sort of medium to long term, your life will improve when you stop gambling, and it does start to improve from the moment that you decide enough is enough, and you start taking steps to sort of quit this addiction. But one thing people don't tend to say or don't tend to talk about is the very early stages where actually everything just seems to get a little bit worse before it even begins to improve. And the reason I want to talk about this today is from a very real perspective. I want people who are quitting, who have just decided to quit, who are in the early stages of abstinence, of recovery. I spoke in my last video how I don't really like that term, but people who are in the early stages of giving up, quitting, abstaining from gambling. To them, things may feel like they're getting worse, and they may feel like, what's the point in this? Why, and this isn't something people talk about an awful lot, and I think it's important to talk about it because, it's if you quit gambling and then the next day expect things to be better, and somehow expect things to be improving, you expect instant results. If you don't achieve those, and very few people will, then you might well give up giving up and actually revert to your old ways. I liken it to someone who wakes up on January the 1st and has decided to go on a diet post-Christmas. Now, the chances are that over Christmas you would have put on weight. You obviously spend a lot of time indoors, you eat a lot, you drink a lot, and you're generally unhealthy. You get up on January the 1st, January the 2nd, you eat healthily, you go to the gym, and then you weigh yourself the day after. You're not going to have lost any weight. In fact, the chances are you're going to be heavier than the last time you weighed yourself because of obviously all the stuff that's just gone before. And it's very similar when you quit gambling. The reasons mainly people do to quit gambling are to help improve their mental health, certainly to help improve their finances, and to maybe get back some of that time that they've lost while they've been gambling. And none of those things are going to happen overnight. So let's talk about the money first and foremost. Now, I've said before that gambling isn't a financial problem. Gambling will cause financial problems, and there are certainly financial implications behind gambling. But gambling itself and a gambling addiction isn't a financial problem. It's a problem. It's a psychological problem. It's a physical addiction to dopamine, to then those endorphins. So you won't, fixing the financial side of things won't fix gambling. I'll just very quickly say, I referenced a friend in a previous video who treats gambling or thinks that gambling is a financial problem, and is always telling me that if he had more money, if he was earning more money, that it wouldn't be a problem, and that the problems he was having with gambling wouldn't be an issue if he had more money, which completely misses the point. So basically, when you quit gambling, your finances will improve. I almost promise you that from the moment you quit gambling, your finances will start to improve. However, they won't improve overnight, because anything that has taken that long to, any habit that has lasted that long is likely to have caused a problem or a deficit that won't be fixable overnight. When I quit gambling, I had a significant amount of gambling debt. I call it gambling debt. It was just general personal debt, but obviously the reason for that debt would have been gambling. You wake up the next day having not gambled for 24 hours, and that debt won't have changed. In fact, what's likely to happen if you actually make a real conscious decision to improve your life, to quit gambling, to get a handle on your debt and on your finances, you'll probably feel like things have got instantly worse. And the reason being is that if you've borrowed money, and when you're gambling, your actual full, the full extent of your financial affairs isn't really in the forefront of your mind. Your primary concern is having money to be able to gamble, and you'll generally get that money by most means. Some even tip over into, illegal means, but for the most of us, this would be either spending savings, spending wages, or in a lot of instances, borrowing. So when you finally decide to get a handle on your gambling, to get a handle on all the issues surrounding your gambling, and that includes your finances, the first thing you're likely to do, and the first thing you certainly should do, is to take stock of where you stand. Now, I will do I think I'm probably going to do a mini series at some point about dealing with gambling debt, because actually I think this is one of the biggest problems people have when they stop gambling. But what the first thing you do, and the first thing you certainly should do, is sit down and take stock and work out where you stand financially, how much money you owe, who you owe it to, and that gives you an opportunity to then budget for and manage any outstanding debts that have been caused by this addiction. Now, the reason I say things are likely to get worse before they get better is because when you do this, the likelihood is that you will discover you owe significantly more money than even your most pessimistic estimate. It's just by nature of it. When you give up gambling, or when you take stock of your finances, when you take stock of your debt and what you owe to people, it will generally be a much higher figure than you would imagine. So 1-2 days in, whatever it is, into your gambling recovery, you suddenly realise that actually you're in a much worse position than you initially imagined. So you're feeling worse than when you were gambling, and you're burying your head in the sand. And that's ultimately the thing, is you get to a point where you feel worse because you pulled your head out of the sand, and it's like ripping the elastoplast off, and suddenly you've got something to deal with, but it is the only way forward. So initially you might find you're worse off, and this can actually lead to sort of an element of kind of despair. And what do we do when we're stressed, when we're depressed, when we're low about something as gamblers? Well, we go and reach for that crutch, don't we? In the same way that an alcoholic would reach for the bottle, we reach for our comfortable place, our escapism, which is of course gambling. So don't expect your finances to improve overnight, but of course, when you look at it logically, you have to take stock at some point. You have to assess the damage. You have to work towards fixing it. And the sooner you start doing that, the sooner you do start repairing it. And things are getting better. Things will get better. But maybe you're starting at a point that's a bit further back than you'd estimated, or that you'd hoped. So what other things do we like when we quit gambling? Well, another reason we quit gambling is to help improve our mental health, to make ourselves happier. And again, this won't happen short term. The reason this won't happen in the very short term is because we are taking away something in our lives which, although we know is damaging, and although we may not particularly enjoy, has become quite a significant part of who we are. So you can't take away a crutch, something we do to relax, something we do to escape, and suddenly think that our lives and our mental health is going to be better. Particularly when you look at most addictions, and most addictions are covering up things that we basically don't want to address. Things in our lives, problems in our lives, either current or historic, that we kind of ignore, that we kind of suppress, and we suppress them by partaking in these activities that help us to zone out, in effect, and push these things to the side. So these problems are still waiting for you. The difference is, once again, you're not burying your head in the sand. You're pulling your head out of the sand, and you're looking at, and you should be addressing these problems one by one, and you should be dealing with them instead of escaping them. And that's what we've been doing. In the same way that if an alcoholic has a lot of problems to deal with, they won't deal with them. They'll drink, they'll temporarily feel better because they've escaped that situation. They haven't addressed their problems head on, but all those problems will still be waiting for you. It will take you a little while to take stock of your situation in life, take stock of maybe the things that you should have sorted out previously and you haven't, because every time they've cropped up, every time you've had a problem, you've gambled, you've escaped, you've got away, and you haven't addressed the problems head on. So certainly in the early stages of recovery, you'll be discovering things that you put off and put off and put off. Ultimately, they will get better. Again, ultimately, by clearing your mind of gambling, by allowing yourself to focus on living and on other things, you can fix these problems in your life. You can make things better, whether that's because you're unhappy in your job, no longer leaving work and going and gambling to get away from the stress. Maybe you can look at ways of improving your job, changing your job, or maybe it might even involve changing your whole mindset and maybe achieving more at work and getting more out of it. But certainly in the short term, you don't have that escapism. You're not running away from your problems. You're addressing your problems, and that can cause, an increased level of worry, increased level of stress in the very, very early stages of gambling. But once again, it's the only way to recover, and things will get better. Um, one more thing really is the time element. Now, quite often when we talk about gambling and talk about gambling addiction, people will say, well, it robs you of both your money and, more importantly, people often put this on a much higher pedestal, your time. And I can see why people do that, because ultimately time is one thing that you can't replace. You work hard, you save, you don't spend, you address your debts, as we spoke previously. Eventually you will have more money, you can get more money, but you can't ever get more time. Ultimately our time on this planet is finite. Some live longer than others, but it's finite, so you can't get that time back. But what you'll find is when you quit gambling, you will have more time instantly, overnight. You will have more time because there'll be time that you would have previously spent gambling. You now have more time. Two things will happen. Firstly, you'll find that you don't know what to do with this time. I mean, I'm in the position now where I've stopped gambling, and temporarily at least I have stopped drinking. So the amount of time I spent gambling plus the amount of time I would have spent in the pub drinking, basically talking bollocks to people, I've suddenly got an awful lot more spare time on my hands. And this is great, and this is what you want in the long term. You want to have more time because ultimately, like I say, time is finite, and there are so many better things to do with our lives, so many better ways to spend our time, so many better people to spend our time with than on gambling and with gamblers. But again, it will take time to adapt, because ultimately at the moment, the second you stop gambling, there is a void. It's not instantly filled with new interesting hobbies, new interesting things to do. You suddenly a void of time which we don't know what to do with, and that just gives our conscious mind time to mull over gambling, mull over all the things we want to be doing. And ultimately, again, in the very short term, this will lead to stress. It will lead to a feeling of loss, because you've lost the what you did to fill that time. In the long term, it's the only way forward, but in the short term, you'll feel a bit crap because you've got the spare time, and you should be doing something better with it than gambling, but you don't know what that thing is yet because you're not used to having this spare time or this spare headspace to fill. The other thing as well, I'll just mention around time, and then I'll wrap this video up because I appreciate I'm going on a bit, is that the other thing about time is you'll find that how many times have you been sat with friends, with your partner, and you're kind of half absent because you're either thinking about gambling or you are gambling. You've got bets on and you're checking your phone surreptitiously to see how the football scores are going, or you're having a casual spin on roulette on your phone, and you're mentally not there. You won't have that distraction when you stop gambling, and you might find that actually you're addressing things more directly and with more focus than you were before. And they might not always be things you want to address. If there's problems in your relationship, they will become a lot more pronounced once you stop gambling. But stopping gambling, again, is the only way to improve your relationship. So it's very much a short-term pain for effectively, potentially a long-term gain. So the reason I made this video is because when you stop doing something that is habitual, be that gambling, be that drinking, and I've noticed it again when I've stopped drinking, things will get temporarily worse because you have to take stock, you have to refocus, and you have to adjust. And actually, a lot of it is then taking into consideration the damage you've done historically. The easiest way to deal with that, of course, is to stick your head back in the sand and carry on as you were, but you can't do that indefinitely. So the best time to stop gambling is now, but don't expect to feel 100% sunshine and rainbows overnight, because that won't happen. But trust me, it doesn't take long before things start slotting in place and you do start feeling better and you do start seeing real improvements in your life. You see headways in your debt, you find new interesting ways to fill your time, your relationships improve. So please do stick with it. Anyway, that's it from me for today. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, I do beg for subscribers at this point of every video, so please do subscribe. Pop a like on the video. Leave me a comment if you have anything to say. I always like to hear what people have got to say, and I will catch you on the next one. Cheers for now.